Well, here we are again. Thanks, Facebook, for letting us log on this time. Hello, friend. Whether you are joining us live or watching this later on the internet, you have found yourself tuned in to the fourth episode, part two of the Sharing Music series. My name is Jonathan Pape, and I am part of the Dedham School of Music. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for being here. The Sharing Music is about people who have chosen to make music a part of their lives. Some of the folks who are involved may live down the street from you, while others you may be introduced to for the first time. In previous episodes, our guests have talked about their favorite instrument, the styles they play, and the music that they love. So you may be asking yourself, what's on tap for this episode? That's a good question. I am happy to turn the reins over to my music school colleague, Mr. Mike Emery, to let him answer that one. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you and welcome. So the last year, we've done a lot of work, a lot of thinking about what kind of programming we can offer, how can we best serve the community. Certainly in the last few years, we've all been taking a step back thinking, what's going on? How can we understand this? How can we be better at this? And so as part of this, the Sharing Music series, we've done a lot of different things, but this last week and this week, we've stepped back to look at how music can be used as part of the social justice movement. And last week, we heard from Shannon Jacobs about music and social justice. This week, we're taking a more of a historical perspective. Kathy Emery she's an author, she's an educator and an activist, and has worked on this topic for years as a college professor, as a high school teacher, and in other capacities. So she's also my sister. So I've been hearing this stuff for a long time. And I heard this before, but I'm looking forward to tonight. And I want to thank everybody for signing on and look forward to it. So take it away.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And what I will do is share my screen with everybody in order to I have some PowerPoint slides and some excerpts from documentaries that I'm going to share with everybody. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. And one of the things that I've asked our hosts to do is that if I say anything that you don't understand, and if you have a point of information, a clarification, definition, please feel free to write it in the comment session, and they will interrupt me and ask me for that. So without any further ado, I'll start. And as Mike said, that what they've asked me to do is talk about the songs and the civil rights movement and the women's movement. And songs, well, they asked me to talk about songs and social justice movements. And so what I decided to do is sort of take two case studies, and one being the civil rights movement, one being the women's movement. And I think I'm trying to make 4 points in this presentation tonight. One is that songs were crucial to the success of the use of nonviolent direct action, and that nonviolent direct action was fundamental to the success of the civil rights movement. So those are the two. And so the first half is going to be about the civil rights movement. Then I'm going to skip to another case study, but this time I'm going to take the person as the Holly Neer as my case, and talk about how she was radicalized by the civil rights movement, as many young people were, and she made significant contributions to the peace, women's, and the LGBTQ movement. And so the question for most activists, or most people, is if we want to make the world a better place for other people, is how does one change a culture and its politics? And you have periods of social movements when the historical conditions are right, when a lot of the infrastructure has already been put in place, and that the infrastructure and the historical moment allow for the sustained decade or so of action and that puts pressure on the government to respond. And unless a movement really understands how to use nonviolent direct action strategically and the arts strategically, it's not going to be a very successful movement as far as I understand it. But before we dive into what was the civil rights movement, I want to say what it wasn't. And it was not spontaneous. It really was called the Freedom Movement. There were many hundreds and thousands of people that played crucial leadership roles, not just Martin Luther King, although he played a very important role. I don't want to, diminish his role. And as I've always said to a lot of the people who I've taught this material before, is that a march is not a movement. And when you have a march, the marches are really not what makes a movement. It's the networking, it's the direct nonviolent action, it's picket lines. That's what makes it successful. And a lot of people, especially young people today, the civil rights movement didn't achieve anything, and that's absolutely not true. So as I said, it's the Southern Freedom Movement, and if you can see in the top right of my slide, there was the Upper South, and then there was the Deep South. And so what the Southern Freedom Movement did, I'll call it the Civil Rights Movement because that's what people are used to hearing, is it dramatically changed apartheid in the entire South. And there are many arguments over when it began. Just for simplicity's sake, I'll say it starts with the Supreme Court decision Brown versus Board, because that indicated that the federal government was interested in coming back to the South after it left in 1877 when it gave up on Reconstruction. And the Montgomery bus boycott that happened in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955 was a 13-month boycott that had been in the works, they'd been planning that for a long time. And it was the first mass movement in the United States around the issue of racial justice. But what really changed the South were essentially four major events. And the sit-ins in the 60s, the freedom rides from 61 to 63, sort of the climax of the movement in 1964, Mississippi Freedom Summer. These three, the sit-ins, they desegregated the Upper South, but the sit-ins didn't work in the Deep South for a lot of reasons. And so freedom rides were designed to go down to the Deep South and to desegregate the South, to bring the movement south, is what the freedom rides were trying to do. And the freedom rides were successful in Georgia and Alabama, but not in Mississippi. Mississippi was the worst state in the Union. It's a lot better now, and I'm not quite sure one can say it's the worst state in the Union today. But Mississippi Freedom Summer was where a new political party was born in Mississippi. And Selma has been memorialized in Anna DuVernay's film. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it. And what these major events led to were four civil rights acts, and this 57 and 60 were about allowing for federal intervention in the South. 1964 was outlawed segregation, and 65. Which is very relevant today, given Republican attempts to roll back access to the vote. That was supposed to protect the vote in the South by the use of federal marshals. What was accomplished by this was the elimination of being terrorized. Blacks in the South were terrorized until the Civil Rights Movement by violence, lynchings. And freedom of association, which is nothing to sneeze at. What was not accomplished was there was no freedom from poverty and no freedom from discrimination. So we obviously still have a lot of work to do. it's really important to understand that there were four major organizations. There were hundreds of thousands of organizations, but there were four major ones that provided sort of the umbrella for others to coordinate under and within. And they themselves created they created a coalition for Freedom Summer called COFO. The NAACP, most people are aware of, but most people don't know about CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. Was in 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That was King's organization. And the most important and most effective group, if you had to choose, they were all crucial. Without any one of them, it wouldn't have happened. But what the young people of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they really provided the energy, and they put their bodies on the line, and they were the ones that did most of the nonviolent direct action. And this slide is really to talk about the importance of the historical moment. I said that social movements don't happen unless it's the right historical moment, and what's in black, except for the Montgomery boycott, is a little bit of the historical moment. And what led to the creation of the NAACP was this horrible lynching that was happening from 1880 to 1920, and a lot of the so-called race riots where white people would go into black neighborhoods and destroy them and murder the black people, destroying their economic base. And it was the 1908 Springfield, Illinois race riot that led to the NAACP. And the NAACP, this is important to understand the success of the freedom movement, because with the infrastructure of the local chapters that were national, and led by Black World War II vets, was the foundation upon which the civil rights movement, which is in the little box to the right here, all this action here depended on the local chapters. They connected with the local chapters. Where does nonviolent direct action come from? It comes from the pacifists of World War I and Gandhi's Satyagraha, and CORE was created in 1942, and they started with the sit-ins in Chicago against discrimination against segregated housing. And of course, famously, when 26-year-old Martin Luther King was elected president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and the mass and the boycott started, and it made the newspapers around the world, by the way. People American blacks and whites who had been studying with Gandhi got on the first plane home and went to Montgomery and taught Martin Luther King about the philosophy and tactics of nonviolent direct action. And out of the Montgomery bus boycott came the creation of a sort of a pastor organization of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that then started training young people into how to do the nonviolent direct action. And so by 1960, you have a bunch of black college students really wanting to do something because they see their comrades in Africa, the African colonial movements, being so successful that gives them sort of the impetus and desire. And you have sit-ins that break out all over. Over 50 towns and cities in the South have sit-ins in 1960. And as I said before, they were in the South, but the Deep South was so violent, and white supremacy had such a hold on the government, and it was so violent that the sit-ins and picket lines didn't work in Alabama and Mississippi. And that's why the Freedom Rides were designed to take buses from all over the country, people would get on the buses, and black and white together would sit on these just regular Trailway Greyhound buses and go down to the South, and they would try to get as deep and as far as possible. And it was intended to provoke violence, and it was the violence that then they hoped would not only be carried on the news, and thus generating sympathy from everybody in the United States towards the South, and it did do that, but it would also force the federal government to come and protect the riders. And however, Mississippi again thwarted these efforts, and that's when they came up with a new strategy, Freedom Summer. And you'll notice that I've left sort of the Selma to Montgomery March out, sort of hanging in the breeze there. And that certainly was an important event because it led to it finally pushed Congress to pass the 1965 Civil Rights Act. But all of that was in the works, throughout the decade, and it was really the sort of the last gasp of this kind of action, and it's just too complicated to explain what happened. I just want you to understand that direct action was so crucial to the civil rights movement because it was it was what got everybody else involved. Just like George Floyd, it went viral, right? So what before you had the internet, to go viral, you actually had to have lots of sit-ins, lots of people being beaten up, nice dressed college kids being beaten up who were just sitting there minding their own business, and that's what got everybody else to begin to participate in boycotts. And it's the boycotts that really desegregated towns and cities. But the sit-ins were crucial in getting the support for the boycotts. I'm just going to go quickly because I'm taking too much time. To get to the connection to the songs, and it wasn't just songs, but it was theater, it was poetry, posters. I mean, the arts itself were very, very important part of fundraising, of sit-ins. Direct action is very hard. You have to be disciplined. You have to get beaten up, and you have to train for it. And it's like you have to go to boot camp before you're ready to do it. And in order to sustain that kind of energy, songs were really crucial. Songs keep people together in a community, and as I said, they also draw people into the kind of action that is needed for a successful movement. Bruce Hartford, he actually lives in San Francisco where I am, and he trained people in nonviolent direct action for Dr. King and SCLC, also for CORE. And he always says, and it's all on his website, he always says that singing is to chanting on a picket line as an elephant is to a mouse, because he's been upset the last 10, 12 years because you've got all these marches and picket lines and people are chanting and yelling. When you yell, it's cathartic for you, but what it does is it alienates bystanders. People are afraid of anger, and singing draws people in. And singing is also cathartic, but it also has the benefit strategically, practically, of drawing people in. And to talk about infrastructure, the Highlander Folk School trained people to be song leaders, but song leaders also came out of the sit-ins. SNCC was created out of the sit-ins, and they realized how important singing was, so they created the SNCC Freedom Singers. This is Guy Carawan, Zilphia Horton, who taught people songs and the role of singing in strategic nonviolent direct action. The SNCC Freedom Singers went and did concerts and fundraising, but also spread the news. Again, no internet, so they had all this other stuff that needed to get the word out. And I circled, this is Bernice Reagan Johnson, and she then she's connected to Holly Nero. I'm going to talk later in this presentation. Fannie Lou Hamer is very famous. If you are familiar with the civil rights movement, she's a well-known figure in the movement, and was very important to Freedom Summer. And of course, out of the churches, you got songwriters and song leaders. This is a lot of information, and the only point I'm trying to make here is that nonviolent resistance and singing were essential to the success of the freedom movement, and it was used by design. It was planned, part of a larger strategy. And nonviolent resistance is not possible without songs. And I'm going to show you some film excerpts. The people themselves, a documentary talking about the role that singing played, like songs like "We Will Overcome," "We Shall Overcome," "We Shall Not Be Moved," "Oh Freedom," "Buses Are Coming." So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this, and enjoy. The 1960s sit-ins begin desegregating the Upper South. From 1961 to 63, freedom rides hoped to desegregate the Deep South. The purpose of the freedom rides was to force the federal government to enforce desegregation at interstate bus stops. The first freedom rides were stopped by violence in Alabama. The freedom rides resumed, but then were stopped in Mississippi. The riders were arrested. The riders were sent to Parchman Prison. Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett hoped that this would end the campaign to desegregate Mississippi.
Ross Barnett thinks that he has the ultimate move on the chessboard by sending them to Parchman Farm. So Freedom Riders take the pretty brave stand of saying, fine, we'll go to Parchman, and we'll fill Parchman up, and we'll make Parchman the next site of the civil rights movement.
CORE and SNCC recruited and trained over 300 people from all over the country to take a bus to Jackson and get arrested.
We must now fill the jail and be willing to remain for at least a minimum of 60 days or more.
It became a continuation of the Freedom Ride. Parchman becomes every much the location in the Freedom Rides as the bus depots themselves.
I'd like to see the show of hands of those of you who will be willing to continue the Freedom Ride in the near future. Put them up high, please.
Through songs, the prisoners reminded themselves and the guards of the purpose of their imprisonment.
We made up a song saying that buses are coming. And we sang it to the jailers to tell them and warn them to get ready, to be prepared, that we were not the only ones coming. So we started singing, buses are a-coming, oh yes. Buses are a-coming, oh yes. Buses are a-coming, buses are a-coming, buses are a-coming, oh yes. We say to the jailers, better get you ready, oh yes. The jailers say, all right, shut up all that singing and hollering in here. This is not no playhouse, this is the jailhouse. So we said to ourselves, what are you going to do, put us in jail? Better get you ready, oh yes. Better get you ready, oh yes. They said, wait a minute, hold it. If we hear one more peek out of you guys, we're going to take your mattress.
You can take our mattress, oh yes. You can take our mattress, oh yes. You can take our mattress, you can take our mattress. You can take our mattress, oh yes.
And then they said that they were going to take our toothbrushes. And someone struck out, you can take our tooth. We said, wait a minute, hold up. This is time for Quaker consensus. We all got to agree on this together. Because here we were, 8 of us in a cell built for 2. And that means you have in close quarters. And so we learned to sing with our mouths closed so we wouldn't breathe on each other. And we sang, you can take our toothbrush, oh yes. You can take our toothbrush, oh yes. You can take our toothbrush, you can take our toothbrush. You can take our toothbrush, oh yes.
All right, so I'm running out of time here, so that's why I've stopped that. But you can see the humor, in the face of incredible persecution and basically torture. I mean, a lot of them were tortured in the jails. So what happened after 1965? Well, conditions changed drastically, and what Freedom Summer did, what Selma did, what the Freedom Rides did, is that they offered experiences that developed a whole generation of Black leaders who have been expanding Black power ever since. Stacey Abrams owes her position in Georgia and perhaps being the next governor in Georgia to what happened in the Deep South with the Freedom Rides and Freedom Summer and the Selma movement. But the movement moved on, and once apartheid was broken in the South, new strategies and organizations emerged. Most Northern volunteers from the Freedom Rides went back home, and from Freedom Summer went back home to New York, to California, to Wisconsin, to Michigan, and continued the movement there with their newfound expertise. And so Bernice Johnson Reagan, one of the SNCC Freedom Singers, and also the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock, has said that it's the Borny movement, and so many of the from 65 to 1980, you had this tremendous, incredible. It's called the 60s, but it was basically from 1955 to 1980. You had this incredible movement, social justice movement, that changed the United States forever. And all the attacks today on critical race theory by Republican state legislatures that we're reading in the headlines in the newspaper these days, that all comes from Black studies, Chicano studies. That because during 65 to 75, all the direct action forced universities to adopt Black studies and Chicano studies and women's studies and American Indian studies, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the people who came out, was inspired by the civil rights movement, was Holly Near, and she's was very significant for everybody in the peace movement, in the women's movement, and the LGBT movement. And I'm going to show you some excerpts now from a documentary, a 2018 documentary that PBS made about Holly Near. And what I've pulled out in the documentary is the song that she wrote after 4 white students were shot, killed by the National Guard. There was a protest against the Vietnam War, and at Kent State, and all the students had boycotted classes and were on strike to protest the war. The National Guard is sent in, and in trying to disperse the crowd, they start shooting real bullets, and 4 students are shot. And she sings a song that became very famous among the protesters and really captured the mood. And she'll explain, where she goes from there. She joins Jane Fonda with the Free the Army tour, and she establishes Redwood Records, and then she comes out. She falls in love with a woman, and has a lesbian album, which I was 1978. I just graduated from college myself, and I was just figuring out I was a lesbian, and without this album, I don't think I could have found the courage to really be active and an activist without this. So that to me, and I'm not the only one, as you will see. So without further ado, because we're running out of time, that's not the right one. That's the right one. And let's start at the beginning. Oh, and you may have to turn your sound up a bit if you're watching this online, because the recording is very soft. So there. There you go.
I did Hair on Broadway. It had been running for 2 years, and I just went in for a short period of time. But while I was there, the students were killed at Kent State. I met Dean Kaler, who was one of the survivors of the Kent State shooting, and he asked me if I would write a song. And then It Could Have Been Me is what became the song. Students in Ohio, 200 yards away, shot down by a nameless fire one early day in May. Some people cried out angry, you should have shot more of them down. But you can't bury youth, my friend. Youth grows the whole world around. It could have been me, but instead it was you. So I'll keep doing the work you were doing as if I were too. Kent State was the incident that catalyzed, mass walkouts in the student movement and the anti-war movement. We felt connected to the people who had perished, and I think and hope we all remember Holly's putting emotion and sound and music to that feeling of it could have been me, I could have been her, we all could have been the people who perished there. Freedom, freedom, freedom. If you can die for freedom, I can too. And there were all kinds of actors and actresses and musicians that trying to figure out how to have an entertainment industry response to the war. And that's where I first heard James Bond.
The Army tour is the Bob Hope tour. 68, 69, 70. Jane Fonda comes out as a revolutionary anti-war activist. And it occurred to her that she would do the opposite, the un-Bob Hope tour.
We were rehearsing, and in walked this angel with this long kind of rose-colored hair, and then she sang, and it was like, wow, that voice was so pure. What is on his mind? I'm a pretty piece, and he's just trying to score.
The single most forgotten thing about the anti-war movement was that Free the Army show. If it was ever shown now on CNN, people would not believe what they're seeing. 5,000, 10,000, 18,000 troops all cheering.
I was the baby in the bunch. As it turned out, most of the sketches, the part that I was playing was the feminist, or the one that was making fun of the woman who wasn't the feminist. I mean, it was kind of, those were the parts I got. So in saying the lines, I was reading the script of a feminist, and that's how I became one. And talking to the women in the military, and talking to the women in the Philippines, the Filipinas, the Hawaiian women, the Japanese women, the Okinawan women, they made me a feminist. So I came into feminism through a global door. And when I got home from that, I just had to rethink everything in my life. The sexual revolution of the 60s, really meant men were on top. For the most part, it was very male dominated. And that kind of bled into the anti-war movement. It was a pretty macho crowd.
The women's movement came out of the civil rights and the peace movement because if even in those movements we loved with all of our hearts, still we were mimeographing, there's a word from the past, or not recognized or not allowed to lead, then we realized there had to be an autonomous women's movement.
We started to have a sort of economic freedom, so that we didn't have to get married in order to stay alive. It was okay to be in the workplace in the 60s. So when you have economic freedom, you don't have to get married. You're not tied to men. And having that freedom
freedom of a lot of different things to take place. I started meeting women who were singing feminist songs, singing songs that came specifically from a woman's perspective. She was rocking on the pillow, rocking in a rocking chair. I never had such good talking. I knew that she really cared. I wanted to make her young again, but all I could do was cry. I love that old time woman till I die. I met Mae Christian and Chris Williamson and Margie Adam. Some of us felt very strongly that this particular tool, this women's music tool, was a way to communicate feminist values far out into the world, way beyond the speeches, way beyond any intellectualism. Why don't you sing this song? Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. What do you do for your living? Are you forgiving? Giving shelter? Women on Wheels, the fact that it was the four big women's music stars, that it was a concert tour across California, reached what, 120,000 people or something. The word went out. People would see me alone, Chris alone, Holly and Meg alone, or just the two of us, or maybe the three of us, said the four of them. They called us the Fab Four. The Fab Four are performing together. They're doing this concert. Women flew in from all over the country to see the four of us play. And we did one concert every night that was for the general public, and we did one concert for women only, which was very controversial. Women was also a code word. I mean, it was a lesbian concert. In terms of new feminism and new gender identity, I had just walked into the Beehive, and it was really exciting. I mean, these songs were being sung in the privacy of living rooms in the same way that lesbian novels were being wrapped in brown paper packages so the postal worker wouldn't see what was being delivered. We were creating an environment for women to express their full humanity in whatever ways seemed appropriate to them, as opposed to being defined by the dominant culture that said you have to be this way and you have to love this person. I always had a heterosexual expectation of myself, and I moved in the world that way. So the press would say, well, aren't you heterosexual? Why are you in this? And I would say, I'm here for the music. I'm here for these women. I'm here because I'm learning. Imagine my surprise, now that I found you, but I ache all over wanting to know your every dream. I wrote a song called Imagine My Surprise, which I wouldn't be lying or exaggerating if I said that there weren't thousands of women who came out to that song. And I just remember playing that song over and over and over, play the tape over and over. I probably wore it out. And I know so many women who have told me that they changed their lives, they came out, they quit their jobs, they did all kinds of things because they went to a Holly Near concert. It was a religious experience. When I first came out, I think they thought, oh my God, this is one of the voices that really speaks to the anti-war movement and the solidarity community, and we just lost her. She's gone bananas and has come out as a lesbian. You know, men had been having exclusive groups since time immemorial and calling it the Harvard Club or something, but nobody minded that. But to have an exclusively female concert was viewed as undemocratic, exclusionary, and so on. At the beginning of any movement, whether it's gay liberation or the women's movement or whoever, people are really angry because they're starting to understand how bad it is. They're finally confronting what it is that they're fighting against. It closes out, it locks out a lot of people. I had to go back to the drawing board and say, well, what is it that women do? Who are we? What do we think? And in some ways, I believe that separatism is a way to help answer that question. Any group of people can separate themselves for a moment from dominant culture and say, how would I think if nobody had their foot on my neck? You know, if I was independent of a cultural identification. And then when you get that, then you can bring it back into the circle more informed. So Holly hired me and two other women out of this alternative women's network. Anna Russell, her parents, had been running the record company out of their house that she grew up in. They moved to a smaller house in Ukiah, and four lesbians moved in and took over the running of the record company, basically. And Redwood went on for nearly 20 years and produced some amazing music. Meeting Bernice Regan and working with Sweet Honey and the Rock was in part the inspiration for me to move out of being a single artist, family-run record company, to recording other artists who were articulating diverse cultural experiences. It was a very important moment for me. It influenced my sense of direction. Sweet Honey was very, very influential for me as an African American woman, to see a whole group of sisters seriously throwing down and doing their thing. And it was one of the things that actually drew me to Redwood. I felt that I could have a connection. And so Redwood really spoke to my heart in that way, in terms of diversity and all of those kinds of things. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing for our lives. I think the song that probably resonates the most as an anthem is Singing for Our Lives, which she wrote when Harvey Milk was assassinated.
The mayor of San Francisco was shot and killed in his office in City Hall this morning. So was Harvey Milk, a city supervisor. As a member of the Board of Supervisors, Harvey Milk was a champion of homosexual rights.
We're driving down to San Francisco. It was like we had to be there. We just had to get there. I'm driving and I suddenly hear this guttural noise. There's a primal sound coming out of Holly. And she starts humming. And she hums it and she hums it and she hums it, and then she starts singing. And by the time we get to San Francisco, she's written 2 verses. And that night we all sang, "We are gay and lesbian people," and for many it was the first time they'd said those words out loud about themselves. And then the song flew out and allies began to sing it. And the words were changed to "We are gay and straight together." And the song found its way into the Unitarian hymnal. And then we learned a lot more about sexuality. And now I can't fit all the words into the meter of the song.
Okay, that's we're running out of time, and I even though I'm a teacher for 30 years, for 35 years or something like that, I still make the rookie mistake of having too much for the time, and I do hope that the information that you have all seen today gives you tonight gives you a sense of how important music is to movements, and what I would like to do is have some time for any kind of questions, comments, reactions. You know, what did this, you know, how did people think about this? You know, what questions you might have, anything like that.
Well, first off, Kathy, thank you. That was a lot to learn, a lot to listen to, and I was great. So first, I want to say thanks for that. I have a couple of observations since you mentioned it, and want to let my colleagues ask as well. When Pete Seeger was talking, I couldn't help but notice the sheet music said slow with determination, and you know, as a musician, I've read a lot of sheet music, or I've tried, but I've never seen that before. That one really stood out. My second thing I wanted to, is actually a question. When you were talking about people who are afraid of anger, and you talked about the difference between yelling and singing. Could you go back to that? Was that a quote? Was that where did that point come from? Sort of trying to process and take notes at the same time.
That that was just standard nonviolent training explanation. That was standard for all the nonviolent training that people got. Was that, you know, all the like Bruce Hartford, we would teach young people. James Lawson. I mean, they all, you know, said you can't, you know, you don't want to be angry. You don't want to be violent. You don't want to do anything that threatens the moral high ground that you're trying to seize by being nonviolent, provoking the violent, but getting a violent reaction, so that people, bystanders, and people looking on can see who the real thugs are. And once you generate that sympathy from the audience through being beaten up or singing while you're being beaten up, or, you know, but if you start yelling and screaming at people, then you know, I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. What does aggressive protest music do? What does it actually accomplish? You know,
A lot of things. A lot of things.
Well, I mean, to be more specific, I mean, there's aggressive in the sense of fast music, loud music, etc., like that kind of, versus the focus of the songs that you're sharing. It got me wondering that question, right? Like there are some very loud bands that are very talented musicians, but a lot of people use it as an opportunity to be aggressive.
Yeah.
Just to think about what we're talking about, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Like, go ahead. Sorry.
They're not. I mean, there's a place for loud, aggressive music. You know.
No doubt.
Yeah. I mean, you know, music allows you to process and vent emotion, right? Music, lyrics help you formulate your identity and all that. I mean, there are many uses of music, but for effective nonviolent direct action, it has to be that which promotes the action and is consistent with the goal of the action. The action is to educate people, to recruit people, to just and to allow the participants themselves to maintain their determination, to go back to the liner notes or the instructions about how to sing "We Shall Overcome," right? I mean, it's hard to maintain your determination and over 10 years. You know, it's hard. You know, when you get beat up, it's hard to go back and get beat up again. And the only way you can do that, or, you know, to walk in the rain in a picket line for hours, right? Or the guy that says, you know, we were in jail, we got beat up, so we sang. They didn't feed us, so we sang. Maintain morale, right? And I mean,
it's not.
Yeah, loud, aggressive music would be, I guess, be fine, but you need to calm your soul down.
Right. So another question for you: can you compare the movements in the '60s to what we saw this summer?
What did we see this summer?
This past summer.
John, can you clarify that?
You want to come on, Mr. Monahan?
I don't understand what did we see this past summer? Oh, you mean with the George Floyd stuff? You mean
for example?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, see, that's the thing, you know, with what happens when there's violence, it completely undermines the message of the nonviolent of the movement, and it hands the opposition a stick with which they beat you. And it doesn't advance it at all. So, you know, most of the protests after George Floyd, or most of the protesters protesting the police brutality, they were nonviolent. They were marching peacefully around. They weren't singing, so we don't know what the message was. I mean, if they'd been singing, then it would have been a lot different, I think. Sure. But then there was the looting. And the looting is you know, breaking stuff. I mean, that's just pure anger. I mean, Jane Fonda saying in the Holly Near thing, that people at the beginning of a movement, people are really, really angry, and what protest songs, what freedom songs did is they channeled that anger, right, into strategic activity. I mean, you have to channel it. The Selma to Montgomery march, the 5-day march from Selma to Montgomery, was designed in order to get people not to be so angry because Jimmy Lee Jackson had been murdered in Selma, and everybody. I mean, the whole movement was about to unravel because they were just tired of being beaten and killed by 1965. And so the SCLC said, let's have a march so people can just cool off for 5 days, but channel it, and sing. But I mean, we all know that Black Power and came out of the civil rights movement, and by 66, Stokely Carmichael had begun talking about Black Power, and what he meant was Black political power, not. But the Panthers, Huey Newton heard about that and adopted it, and in the North and the West, this, it was a whole different thing. But violence does not. I mean, you don't attack your enemy at its strongest point. The government, the oppressive government, has a monopoly of the use of force, and anger in violence. So you can't attack the strength. You have to undermine it, and you undermine it by taking away the consent of the governed. Every government or every authority rests on the consent of the governed. If you can erode that consent, then you've changed society, and that's what the civil rights movement did. And that's what a lot of the peace movement did, is they eroded the consent.
Right. That's interesting. I found it fascinating on, I think it was a Tuesday night over the summer. There was a protest in Boston at Franklin Park. It was very well put together. They had all kinds of speakers. There was music. There were interactions between the police and the officials and the protesters, and they were by and large positive, right? There was communication going on. At the same time, on split screen, there was another protest in one of the cities, 30 miles down the road, which ended up with the National Guard coming to help dissipate the crowd and all of this. And watching them on the split screen, as you just talked about, was like watching two different things, right? One was about communication and learning and sharing, and one was not. It was about violence and getting on the TV. At the same time, we had a political campaign going on, right? And it was really hard for me to discern when I watched the news and I watched all the coverage, what I was seeing that reflected an actual movement or people becoming aware or people changing, and what was tied to a political campaign, right? That somebody wanted me to vote a certain way, and that's why I was seeing this. So very interesting. Were there those kind of contrasts, in the 60s and 70s? I was just coming of age then. I really didn't.
The only violence between 55 and 65 was done by the white supremacist racist cops, and that was designed to be that way.
Yeah.
And that's what got the Civil Rights Acts passed. That's what got so many people interested in social justice. Once they went down to Mississippi and they came back, like Gloria Steinem said, that they loved the peace movement, the civil rights movement, but all the women were doing the mimeographing, and wait a minute, this is a problem. And now that I've been empowered by my work with the civil rights movement, I need to, go and liberate my, the female part of me, or the gay part of me, or, the Chicano part of the civil rights veterans went dispersed throughout the country, and we're teaching people, how to be nonviolent and use direct action strategically. Did get violent, and that's why Nixon was able to. Once it did get violent, Nixon was able to campaign on law and order, and he won in '68, and that led to Reagan in 1980, and then there were very, very dark times until Obama gets elected, and Occupy starts the next movement that we're in right now.
Right. Hey, Mike, did you have any questions? I know
I did.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. So I got stuck on Bull Connor when he released them from prison, said the music was driving him nuts. So one, that gave me deep satisfaction. But two, just to explore that a little bit, it strikes me that today, as frustrated as we may be about the lack of taking advantage, as we may be, others may not be, of music, we do seem to have better grasp of music as a tool still than those who are resisting the current civil rights initiative. So so how do you see that going on today in terms of the use of music? Is it happening? Is it, are we losing it? What would be the 2 or 3 things that we could see happening now that would help us move that forward?
I don't know. I don't see people singing. Last week, some people with Shannon's presentation, talked about that we don't sing anymore. I mean, we're all listening with our earbuds, to our own music, and we're not using music to do the kinds of things that it can do for a movement. And I think the movements have suffered as a result.
So the concept of a song leader, and how is that a place to start?
Well, that's where it started with the civil rights movement. Was people like at the Highlander School, Guy Carawan and Zilphia Horton teaching people how to be a song leader, and people coming out of the churches and like Ruby Dee said in the excerpt, that everybody was writing songs about topical songs. They're writing the words about what's going on in Mississippi. Phil Oakes, had a song. I mean, there were lots of songs about Mississippi. I mean, it was on everybody's mind. It kept the issue front and center. I don't see people singing protest songs today.
Mm-hmm. So how did maybe this is for another topic, but I'm wondering how we engage people, prepare people, recruit people to be song leaders. There was a lot of creativity, a lot of new songs that were written during that time. At the same time, a lot of them were based on spirituals, historical songs. So we don't need great songwriters. We need to adapt the tools and the music of the past and use that today.
You take a nice easy melody from Beyonce or Lady Gaga, and you change the words. Mm-hmm. But then you have to teach song leaders who are on a picket line, that they need to start singing, right? And so if you have a picket line or you have a march, you place a bunch of people along the picket line that are song leaders, and they start singing, and after a while, it's a very simple song. I mean, buses are a coming, oh yeah, buses are a coming, oh yeah. I mean, that's not oh freedom, oh freedom. It's oh freedom over me. Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Period. I mean, that's it, right? And then the song leaders will say, no integration. They'll just add something like that, and then it's like a round, and so it's easy for people to pick up on the picket line, right?
When you think of if there's an event or something to take action, you can take that and just add a musical component. Yeah. You recruit some song leaders, you select some songs, you create a verse or two, and you throw them in there, and then you just let it go and work it.
It keeps people nonviolent, which is really important. Mm-hmm. It can educate people, no integration, black and white together, We, Holly Nears, we are gay and straight together, and we're singing. I mean, I can't sing, but you don't have to sing. People, this is the problem: is that people when they sing, they think they have to be on key and in tune all the time, and that's not. If you get a whole bunch of people singing, like 100, 200 people at the same time, it's an amazing experience. If you're singing with 50 people in a room at the top of your lungs, it's transcendent. I mean, it goes beyond. You're not worried about dying or whatever. You're just like in the moment. It's just like it's.
And observers can see that and feel that and hear
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, remember the woman from the dance brigade saying that a Holly Near concert was a religious experience.
Mhm.
Now, maybe there was a little cult stuff going on, and I am sort of guilty of.
You remember that cult?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, Holly Near's like, she's it as far as I'm concerned. Um, I've met her 4 or 5 times, and every time I'm in her presence, I can't speak. I mean, I'm just starstruck.
Starstruck?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You're allowed.
yeah.
Well, I think that's actionable. The idea of understanding the song leader role and preparing people to do that and bringing that to our community. So I think we got our charge.
Well said. Well said. So on that note, I think we have gone for a good long time. We've talked a lot of things. So it feels like a good point to wrap up and say a big thanks to our guest, Kathy Emery, for volunteering to be here with
I
us.
love this. I love this material. I mean, whenever I get depressed about what's going on today, I go back to the material and it.
Go back to it. Yeah. Thanks, as always, to Mr. Monahan for helping out behind the scenes, and to the folks who are watching us live or watching us later. We hope that when each of our episodes is over, you will think a little bit differently about a style of music that never interested you before. Listen to a new playlist a little bit longer, and maybe, just maybe, you'll pick up that instrument you've always wondered about. If you enjoyed our program and are interested in taking a lesson or class with our school, we have posted our contact information on our Facebook page and our website, dedhamschoolmusic.org. It has all of our classes. We cannot wait to meet you. If you're interested in supporting our school and programming like this, we've done our best to make that as easy as possible. There's a donate button on the top of our page. Thank you. We're grateful for your support. On behalf of all of my friends who are here tonight from the school, thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you next month. All right, I'm signing off the feed.
Thanks, Kathy.